Do you remember the first time you acted publicly in support of your values? In the fall of 1992, when I was a freshman or freshwoman at a small liberal arts college, my home state of Iowa was to vote for the second time in whether or not to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. This proposed amendment to our nation's Constitution simply stated, men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and in every place subject to its jurisdiction. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. The Equal Rights Amendment, or ERA, was born of an idea in the women's suffrage movement in the 1920s. By the early 70s, it had passed both houses of Congress, and states began the slow process of voting on its ratification. The ERA campaign in Iowa had been defeated in 1980, but by 1992, ERA supporters were trying again. I must have learned about the ERA campaign in one of the progressive magazines I had started reading when I got to college, because I don't remember anyone talking about it on my campus. As one raised in an egalitarian household, I found it kind of shocking that in the 1990s, it was still a matter of debate in our nation whether men and women should have equal rights under the law. Alas, I did not know any other students who were thinking about these issues at my tiny college in small town Iowa. So I took one of my first steps as an activist by myself. I felt compelled to do something. So I bought some poster board and made a poster in support of the ERA and displayed it from the third floor window of my women's dorm, where many students on the small campus would see it. Sounds like such a small thing, but it felt very big to me at the time. When the ERA was defeated again that year in Iowa, my disappointment was deep. And I felt lonely with it. I had learned that my English professor was following the campaign too and had a strong emotional investment in the outcome, so I went to commiserate with her. Iowa had let down this gentlewoman who had waited all over 6 or 7 decades for the nation to acknowledge women as deserving of equal respect and treatment under the law. And it was clearly now not going to happen in her lifetime. The memory of her bespectacled, big blue eyes filling up with tears still makes my heart hurt. Well, I continued through my 4 years of undergraduate study, and alongside my college courses, I devoured independent reading on social change, feminism, religion, and a variety of other topics that intrigued me. I felt compelled to build on the legacy of past social movements and to help make the world more just and loving. But by myself, I wasn't sure how to act in support of the many causes that concern me. I can't remember another action I took in college to express my convictions publicly, not a single one. I was too isolated. When I landed in a major university town to do graduate work in sociology, something significant happened. I encountered networks of people who did act on their convictions, often together. Service learning in a women's shelter and rape crisis center brought me into contact with a community of feminists who worked in very concrete ways to make women's lives better. They knew that the personal is political. I also at this time found a religious community that fit me, finally, not only in terms of theological breadth and openness, but in being a faith of deeds, not creeds, as we like to say. A faith with a long tradition of standing and speaking and acting on the side of love, though we didn't have a campaign by that name yet. This was when I became a Unitarian Universalist. No longer did I need to act alone. I was surrounded by other people who cared and who were motivated to engage in our common life to try to shape it for the better. I was home. I can't fully express the relief and the energy that this sense of community brought to me, but I suspect that many of you know that experience. Perhaps Westside has even been that place for you. Now, don't get me wrong, individual action can be powerful. Gandhi said, "The valiant in spirit glory in fighting alone." And when we act from love, one person can make a difference. But most often, change comes when groups of people work together. As 20th century Unitarian theologian and social ethicist James Luther Adams emphasized, our peculiar American affinity for voluntary associations, for coming together as groups of caring citizens, came initially from the churches of the Radical Reformation, especially the aggressive sects of the left wing of Puritanism. That's our Unitarian branch of the family tree. Despite the individualism that sometimes comes across so strongly in UU culture today, we come religiously from a line of people who believed in the power of the group. Adams characterized participation in covenantal churches like ours and other voluntary organizations as the indispensable discipline of social responsibility. He saw it as a means for institutionalizing a gradual revolution. A means for institutionalizing a gradual revolution. In other words, through groups that choose to be together, we exercise our civic freedoms and we create a better nation. James Luther Adams thus concluded not only that truth remained in the biblical axiom, by their fruits you shall know them, but also that we might say with equal weight, by their groups you shall know them. By their groups. It is through voluntary associations like liberal religious communities that citizens create positive change. And when we look behind the images, even some of those iconic moments of individuals standing up to injustice turn out to be more than meets the eye. Take Rosa Parks, an African-American woman who didn't just decide spontaneously in 1955 to refuse to surrender her bus seat to a white passenger. She didn't somehow accidentally spur the Montgomery bus boycott and the efforts to end racial segregation in the American South. She was actually an activist for several decades before that. And at the time of her arrest, she served as secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So Parks knew that her action would have ramifications far beyond her own life. And she knew that other activists would capitalize on this moment to press their demands for equality. Forward to 2016, and here's a striking image that has been presented as another case of spontaneous individual courage. This Afro-Swedish woman, Tess Asplund, showed up at a rally of the Nordic resistance movement. She entered the Stockholm street and defiantly stood before them, fist raised like Nelson Mandela, as 300 neo-Nazi marchers came toward her. For this act, the BBC has just named her one of the 100 most inspiring women of the year. But like Rosa Parks, while Asplund's action of defiance with her body was spontaneous and certainly was courageous, she was not alone, and it was no mere accident. Tess Asplund has been pushing back against hate groups for 27 years, and she was part of a planned counter-protest of Swedish residents standing up for a multicultural vision of their society. These are both good examples of what the Meta Center for Nonviolence calls obstructive program, moments of protest for people moved by conscience, organized to actively resist or obstruct oppressive groups and structures. About 10 of us from this congregation participated in an obstructive program recently. We joined a protest at Energy Transfer Partners in Dallas in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. As you may know, the Sioux and their allies have for months been resisting the pipeline that company is intent on building and the line of the tribe's water source and some of its sacred burial grounds in North Dakota. The Army Corps of Engineers announced a week ago that it was denying a permit for this section of the pipeline and recommends exploring other routes. News that a group of us were thrilled to learn as we came out of a prayer vigil of solidarity right here at Westside a week ago. But this matter is not settled permanently. The company still signals its intent to complete the pipeline as previously planned, and President-elect Donald Trump has indicated his support for doing so, despite the Army Corps' decision. So further efforts to obstruct the pipeline project may be necessary if the rights of the Sioux are to be honored. The counterpart of obstructive program is what Mahatma Gandhi called constructive program. Constructive program. Constructing the social systems that are a positive, life-affirming alternative to oppressive systems. Programs that bring education to neglected populations or that encourage economic self-uplift of depressed communities are good examples of constructive program. Whereas protest and confrontation or non-cooperation with evil are often the most visible type of social action, cooperation with good, as Dr. King put it, is just as necessary. I look at things like the Brook Farm community that we heard about in our moment of UU history today, and some of the other utopian experiments that our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors undertook. And I see them as a kind of bold, constructive program, trying to create a new way of being. Personally, I have long been drawn to constructive program, to this challenge of creating new forms of social organization, new ways of living that reflect our highest values instead of just fighting the good fight against what's not working. I traveled to India to learn about grassroots economic development, facilitated a study circle on nonviolence and the economy back in our country, and later served on the board of my food co-op in Indiana. There, we explored how to further build the co-op sector as an alternative model of economic organization. So there are many different pathways to action. They don't all look the same for each person. I believe each one of us is called into a process of continuing discernment about how we will participate in the betterment of society. How will you act on behalf of your values? And how will we at Westside act collectively on our transcendent values of compassion, equality, and justice? Now, in the time of Advent on the Christian calendar, it's fitting that we enter into a period of active waiting with this question in mind. We are waiting for much more than a chocolate a day from an Advent calendar, although that certainly gets my 6-year-old out of bed in the mornings lately. We are waiting for more than a single tiny Savior to be born. Although I personally am glad at this time of year to be reminded of the powerful model offered by Jesus of Nazareth. The Jesus of the Gospels displayed two qualities that I suspect all of us would still like to emulate, though so many centuries later. Love for all people, especially those most marginalized, and a readiness to act. Whether Jesus was healing the ill person before him or throwing the money changers out of the temple in an act of powerful defiance of the thieving mercenaries of his day, Jesus did not hesitate to act on his sense of higher purpose. So I think he offers us still very present and relevant inspiration as we ponder what we are called to do as a religious community today. I suspect our period of faithful discernment regarding how Westside can best engage in social action will be more on the order of months than the weeks of Advent. But make no mistake, we will be undergoing such a process. If we truly are a community where compassion leads us to work for justice and equality, we must decide what are the next steps to further those transcendent values. You might look at what I'm sharing today as a starting point to that conversation. A social action can take a variety of modes. I have already mentioned obstructive program or protest, and constructive program or creating new positive forms of social organization. And I have mentioned the role of individual courage, as well as the essential role of groups that harness and direct our desire to do good. I want to share, lastly, a typology of social justice work highlighted by my colleague, Richard Gilbert. Gilbert describes 5 different modes of social justice work that religious communities like ours may engage in. The 5 are social education, social service, public witness, community organizing, and advocacy or systemic change. Let's take a brief look at each one of those. education is the process of studying issues and social dynamics. It sounds very simple, but it's usually the first step of any social movement. Before you can have effective action, you have to raise consciousness and have a grasp of what the problems are. This congregation is engaging in social education right now over in the classroom on issues of mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. It's a vital first step. And we should not underestimate the power of social education. As we said in our responsive reading, when I change, the world changes. Such change has had powerful ripples from our UU congregations in the past. For example, those like Westside who engaged in the Welcoming Congregation program, which is fundamentally a program of social education that helps expand our understanding of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people so that our commitment to inclusion was not just an intellectual commitment, but really fully from the heart. Second, social service is direct, hands-on service work from person to person. This is often the mode of social justice work that we see the most in congregations of any faiths. A spreadsheet put together by Westside Social Justice Council earlier this fall showed that that's the case here too. Of all of these types of social action, the one that has been most active at Westside is social service. From holiday baskets and our work with Samaritan House, to a toiletry drive for South Central Alliance of Churches, and our angel tree. I think of John the Baptist in the Gospel of Luke, shortly before he baptizes Jesus, saying, "If you have 2 coats, give one to the poor. If you have extra food, give it away to those who are hungry." And we're going to be doing that with one other project coming up in a few weeks on Christmas Day, which falls on a Sunday this year. We'll have one service at 11 o'clock. We'll have a brief mini worship. And then most of our focus will be on the service project, putting together lunch bags for those who may be hungry, and then delivering them to some of the low-income apartment complexes here near the church. I hope people of all ages will turn out to participate in that project. The third mode of social justice work is public witness. Gilbert defines this as making known to the community a position on issues for the sake of being heard and seen, and presumably for the sake of influencing decision makers or public opinion. These are marches, sit-ins, and public rallies. Now, I'm under the impression that Westside hasn't done a lot of this as a church, with the possible exception of the Pride Parade, although I know some of you turned out at the Rainbow Lounge incident a few years ago. And with just a few days' notice, I did have 10 Westsiders join me for the Dallas Dance with Standing Rock rally recently. My guess is that many more of you have participated in public witness events as an individual or perhaps as a member of some other group. So I'm curious, I'm going to name off a number of causes, and I want to invite you to stand up or raise your hand if and when I name one for which you have marched or rallied or otherwise carried out public witness. And once you rise, please stay standing until the end. So please stand or raise your hand if you have done public witness for Standing Rock, for Black Lives Matter, for reproductive justice, for Pride Day or other concerns related to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender equality, against domestic violence, for King Day, for environmental concerns related to the Dreamers or other aspects of immigration policy, against the Iraq War or another war, against nuclear weapons, for economic justice, or for any other cause where you marched, rallied, or witnessed. With that, I invite you to look around and notice that about half of the folks present here, which is true at the early service as well, have participated already in this form of social action. Thank you. You may be seated. The fourth mode of social justice that Gilbert looks up is community organizing. This is a method of mobilizing social actors in a given community to address a set of social problems, getting people people of a common interest together to speak with one voice on that concern. Allied Communities of Tarrant, an affiliate of the Southwest Industrial Areas Foundation, served this role here in Fort Worth at one point, but I understand that that chapter is no longer active, so that's probably not one we'll be thinking much about right now. The fifth mode of social justice, the one you see in the middle of the chart there, is called advocacy or systemic change, working on changing policies and policymakers to affect whole systems. So we're talking here about changing laws, ending harmful programs, or creating helpful programs. Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which advocates for common sense reforms to curb gun violence, is an example of one way that some West Siders have participated in this mode of social action. And the Texas UU Justice Ministry, which our collection this month is supporting, is all about this mode of action of advocating for public policies that are consistent with their UU principles. UUs have worked for systemic change since our earliest days, for the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, and similar causes. Our 19th century foremother, Frances Greenwood Peabody, recognized the need for systemic change. She wrote, "The social question of the present age is not a question mitigating the evils of the existing order, but a question whether the existing order itself shall last. Instead of generosity," she said, "people ask for justice. It inquires for the causes of ill fortune and demands justice for the poor. It applies itself to changing the conditions which make people poor, rather than to pitying the poverty which evil conditions have made." Interestingly, this is where Martin Luther King Jr. went too, after the civil rights movement began to see some changes in the law to support racial equality. King turned next to the need for addressing the root causes of poverty, which haunts people of all races in this country, and without which the victories of the civil rights movement would remain hollow in practice. Now, in 2016, we have seen from the presidential campaigns of both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump populist platforms of a sort. We've seen that our nation is responding to this line of thinking right now. So it's a time when we might help bring reforms that truly address the underlying causes of inequality to serve all people. Gilbert puts advocacy in the center of the model because it draws on all of the other modes of action to create lasting change. While different people are often more drawn individually to one or another of these modes of action, each one of them plays an important role in creating social justice. I think we should regard them not as competing, but as complementary modes of action. We can expect that whatever causes we choose to address as a congregation, we will likely be engaging multiple modes of action over time. When I look back now to my 18-year-old self in college, the lone equal rights amendment activist on my campus, I feel a lot of compassion for my younger self. It's hard to speak out all by yourself. It's hard to stand up for what you believe in if you're the only one doing it. But the good news is, no one here needs to do it alone. In a moment when our nation seems as divided as ever, we can come together here to stand with all of those who suffer and to help create the momentum for deep changes in the culture and structure of our society. And although I know it seems like a bleak moment of history to many of us, I believe the opportunity actually is quite great for us to help shift the conversation. So during this Advent season, let us remember not just the pregnant Mary riding on a donkey to Bethlehem. Let us remember not just the infant Jesus born in a lowly stable manger, but let us remember also the lightning-rod leader that babe became, who worked on behalf of the poor widows and others pushed to the margins of his society. Let us welcome Advent as a time to discern our role in addressing the suffering in our society today, with faith that love the guest, love the rose, love the star is on the way. May it be so. Amen. I invite you to rise and bow your spirit and join me for our closing hymn, number 225, Come, O Come, Emmanuel.